This is the story of an extremely rude immigrant who throws a kind pastor out of his restaurant. He's bitter, angry, and has no idea who he's messing with. Let's find out how the pastor handled the situation like a complete boss. One afternoon, a kind old pastor wandered into the restaurant. He was tired and hungry, hoping for a quiet place to rest and enjoy a warm meal. But the restaurant owner, Mr. Chen, with his heart full of bitterness, saw him as just as a problem. "What do you want?" Mr. Chen grumbled, not even bothering to say hello. The pastor, a little surprised by the grumpy greeting, tried to be polite. "Good afternoon," he said with a gentle smile. "I was hoping to have a bite to eat." But Mr. Chen wasn't in the mood for smiles or politeness. "Well, hurry up and order then," he snapped. "I haven't got all day." The pastor, feeling a bit uncomfortable, opened the menu. But before he could even take a look, Mr. Chen started complaining. "Business is terrible," he moaned. "Nobody appreciates good food anymore. All they want is cheap prices and fancy decorations." The pastor tried to offer some words of encouragement. "I'm sure things will get better," he said kindly. "Sometimes all it takes is a little faith and patience." But Mr. Chen scoffed. "Faith?" he sneered. "What good is faith when you're about to lose everything?" The pastor, sensing Mr. Chen's anger and sadness, reached out to touch his arm. "Everyone needs help sometimes," he said gently. "Don't be afraid to ask for it." That's when Mr. Chen completely lost his temper. "Help?" he shouted. "What do you know about my problems? You probably have a fancy house and a big car. You don't know what it's like to struggle." The pastor was taken aback by Mr. Chen's outburst. He tried to calm him down, but Mr. Chen was like a volcano that had just erupted. "Get out!" he yelled, his face turning red. "I don't want your pity or your prayers. Just get out of my restaurant." The pastor, his heart heavy with sadness, realized there was no reasoning with the angry man. He stood up slowly, his eyes filled with compassion. "I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time," he said softly. "I'll pray for you." And with that, he turned to leave. But as he walked away, he gently placed a small, worn Bible on the counter, a symbol of hope and comfort. Mr. Chen, still fuming, watched the pastor go. He snatched up the Bible and threw it in the trash, his anger burning like a wildfire. "I don't need anyone's help," he muttered to himself. "I can take care of myself." But deep down, a tiny voice whispered that he might be wrong. Mr. Chen wasn't always an angry, bitter man. Once he was full of dreams and hope, just like the fluffy white clouds that floated across the bright blue sky. He had come to America with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and a recipe for the most delicious dumplings you ever tasted. He worked hard, saving every penny, until finally he opened his own little restaurant, Chen's Noodle House. It was a cozy place, filled with the warm smells of ginger, garlic, and soy sauce. People loved Mr. Chen's friendly smile and his mouth-watering noodles. But lately, things had been tough. A fancy new restaurant opened across the street, with flashing lights and a menu full of strange modern dishes. People flocked to the new place, curious to try the latest food trends. Mr. Chen's Noodle House, once bustling with happy customers, started to feel as empty as a forgotten fortune cookie. The cheerful chatter was replaced by an eerie silence, and the once shiny tables gathered dust like forgotten dreams. Mr. Chen's smile faded, replaced by a worried frown. He tried to lower his prices, he even added a few new dishes to his menu, but nothing seemed to work. The bills piled up like stacks of unwanted takeout boxes, and the fear of losing everything gnawed at his heart. He started to resent the people who seemed to have it easy, the ones who could afford to eat at the fancy new restaurant without worrying about the cost. He saw them laughing and enjoying themselves, and he felt a pang of jealousy, a bitterness that twisted his insides like a tangled noodle. His anger spilled over into everything he did. He snapped at his employees, complaining about every little mistake. He grumbled at customers, rushing them to order and criticizing their choices. "Why don't you try the spicy Szechuan noodles?" he'd grumble. "Those are the best." and if someone dared to ask for a simple dish like plain fried rice, he'd roll his eyes and mutter under his breath about boring and unadventurous palates. Even his cooking, once a source of joy and pride, became tainted with his negativity. He'd slam pots and pans around the kitchen, his movements jerky and frustrated. The once delicate dumplings became heavy and lumpy, and the flavorful broth tasted bland and lifeless. Mr. Chen was trapped in a cycle of anger and despair, his once bright spirit dimmed by the shadows of his struggles. He had forgotten the joy of cooking, the pleasure of serving others, and the simple satisfaction of making people happy. He had become a grumpy, bitter man, his heart as cold as day-old rice. It seemed like the universe had decided to play a cruel joke on Mr. Chen. Just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. It was like a series of unfortunate events, one after another, each one pushing him closer to the edge. First, the old refrigerator, which had been wheezing and groaning for weeks, finally gave up the ghost. It sputtered, coughed, and then went silent, leaving a puddle of melted ice cream on the kitchen floor. "No," Mr. Chen cried, staring at the lifeless appliance in disbelief. "Not now. I can't afford a new refrigerator." But the universe wasn't listening. It had more tricks up its sleeve. The next day, during the lunch rush, a group of rowdy teenagers stormed into the restaurant. They were loud and messy, throwing food around and making fun of the traditional Chinese decorations. Mr. Chen, already on edge, snapped. He yelled at the teenagers, telling them to behave or leave. But the teenagers just laughed, mocking his accent and making rude gestures. Mr. Chen's blood boiled. He grabbed a broom and chased the teenagers out of the restaurant, yelling threats and curses. The other customers, shocked by the commotion, quickly finished their meals and left, leaving Mr. Chen alone in his empty, echoing restaurant. He slumped against the counter, his head in his hands. "What am I going to do?" he whispered, his voice filled with despair. But the universe wasn't done yet. The final blow came when his two best employees, tired of his constant grumbling and unfair treatment, walked out. "We can't take it anymore, Mr. Chen," they said, their faces etched with disappointment. "You've become so negative and mean. This isn't the restaurant we used to love working in." Mr. Chen watched them go, his heart sinking like a lead weight. He was alone, his business crumbling around him, his dreams turning to dust. He stumbled into the kitchen, the once familiar space now feeling cold and hostile. He kicked over a stack of empty takeout boxes, sending them scattering across the floor. "It's not fair!" he yelled, his voice echoing through the empty restaurant. "Why is this happening to me?" He sank to his knees, tears of frustration and anger streaming down his face. He felt like a failure, a burden, a man who had lost his way. As he sat there, amidst the chaos and despair, his eyes fell upon a small, leather-bound book lying on the counter. It was the Bible the pastor had left behind, the one he had angrily thrown in the trash. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the worn cover. He remembered the pastor's kind eyes, his gentle voice, his message of hope and forgiveness. A wave of guilt washed over him. He realized how cruel and unfair he had been, how he had pushed away the one person who had offered him kindness and support. He opened the Bible, his eyes falling upon a passage about forgiveness and redemption. The words seemed to jump off the page, speaking directly to his heart. He closed the book, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the pastor, apologize for his behavior, and ask for forgiveness. He had to change his ways, to rediscover the kindness and compassion that had been buried beneath his anger and resentment. He had to find his way back to the light. Mr. Chen clutched the small Bible in his hands, its worn leather cover smooth against his rough skin. It felt warm, almost alive, as if it held a spark of something precious within its pages. He traced the embossed cross on the front, his calloused fingers lingering on its delicate curves. He remembered the pastor's gentle touch, the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice as he offered a prayer for a stranger who had treated him with such disdain. A wave of shame washed over Mr. Chen, hot and prickly, making him squirm with discomfort. He thought of his own actions, the harsh words he had spat out like bitter poison, the way he had dismissed the pastor's kindness with a sneer. He saw himself reflected in the dusty mirror behind the counter, his face etched with anger and resentment, his eyes devoid of warmth and compassion. "What have I become?" he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He barely recognized the man staring back at him, a stranger who had taken over his body and soul, a stranger fueled by negativity and despair. He sank into a nearby chair, the Bible still clutched tightly in his hands. He opened it randomly, his eyes falling upon a passage about forgiveness and love. The words seemed to glow on the page, illuminating the darkness that had enveloped his heart. He read about a man who had been wronged, betrayed by his own friends, yet he chose to forgive them, to offer them compassion instead of revenge. He read about a woman who had lost everything, her home, her family, her livelihood, yet she found the strength to carry on, to find hope in the midst of despair. As he read, a strange feeling began to stir within him, a flicker of warmth that spread through his chest like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, a feeling of hope, of possibility, of redemption. He thought of the pastor's words, "Everyone needs help sometimes. Don't be afraid to ask for it." He realized that he had been too proud, too stubborn to admit that he needed help, that he couldn't do it alone. He had been so focused on his own struggles, his own misfortunes, that he had forgotten the simple truth that everyone carries burdens, everyone faces challenges, and everyone needs a helping hand sometimes. He closed the Bible, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, a burden releasing its grip on his soul. He was still scared, still uncertain about the future, but he was no longer alone. He had found a glimmer of hope in the most unexpected place, a beacon of light in the darkness that had threatened to consume him. He had found it in the kindness of a stranger, in the words of a sacred book, in the depths of his own heart. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the pastor, apologize for his behavior, and ask for forgiveness. He had to make amends, to show his gratitude for the unexpected blessing that had been bestowed upon him. He had to start over, to rebuild his life and his business with a renewed sense of purpose and compassion. He had to become the man he once was, the man he was meant to be. He stood up, his shoulders squared, his eyes filled with determination. He would find the pastor, no matter how long it took, no matter how far he had to go. He would seek forgiveness, not just from the pastor, but from himself. He would embrace the unexpected blessing that had been offered to him, and he would use it to create a better life for himself, his family, and his community. A newfound determination burned in Mr. Chen's heart, a fire that melted away the icy bitterness that had consumed him. He was on a mission, a quest for redemption, and he wouldn't rest until he found the kind pastor and begged for forgiveness. He started by asking his neighbors, the shopkeepers and residents who knew the faces of the community better than anyone. "Have you seen a kind, elderly pastor around here?" he'd ask, his voice humble and sincere. "He has a gentle smile and a warm heart." Some shook their heads, others offered vague descriptions, but no one could give him a definite answer. Undeterred, Mr. Chen ventured further, his search leading him to the local churches. He visited each one, his steps hesitant at first, but growing more confident with each place he entered. He'd peek into Sunday school classrooms, hoping to catch a glimpse of the familiar face, or he'd inquire with the church staff, describing the pastor with heartfelt words. "He carries himself with grace," Mr. Chen would explain, "and his eyes hold the wisdom of 1,000 stories." Still, his search proved fruitless. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. Chen's hope began to dwindle. He felt a pang of disappointment, a fear that he had missed his chance to make amends. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the city streets, Mr. Chen found himself wandering through a park, his heart heavy with discouragement. He sat on a bench, watching children play, their laughter echoing through the air like music. Suddenly, he spotted a familiar figure sitting on a nearby bench, feeding pigeons with gentle hands. It was the pastor, his face etched with a peaceful smile as he watched the birds flutter around him. Mr. Chen's heart leaped with joy. He rushed over to the pastor, his steps quickening with every stride. "Pastor!" he called out, his voice filled with relief and excitement. The pastor turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he recognized the man who had so rudely dismissed him from his restaurant. Mr. Chen stood before him, his head bowed in shame, his hands clasped together. "Pastor," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry for the way I treated you. I was rude, disrespectful, and I have no excuse for my behavior." He paused, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "I was angry, frustrated, and I took my anger out on you. I judged you without knowing you, and I am deeply ashamed of my actions." He looked up at the pastor, his eyes filled with remorse. "You showed me kindness, and I repaid you with cruelty. I am truly sorry." The pastor listened patiently, his expression softening as he witnessed Mr. Chen's sincere apology. He reached out and placed a hand on Mr. Chen's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and understanding. "It's all right, my son," he said gently. "I understand that you are going through a difficult time. We all make mistakes, but it's important to learn from them and move forward." Mr. Chen's heart swelled with gratitude. He had expected anger, perhaps even condemnation, but instead he was met with compassion and forgiveness. "Thank you, Pastor," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Your kindness means more to me than words can express." The pastor smiled warmly. "You are forgiven, my son. Now let us talk about how we can help you find peace and happiness." Mr. Chen looked up at the pastor, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and awe. He had expected anger, perhaps even a lecture, but instead he was met with a gentle smile and a warm embrace. "It's all right, my son," the pastor said, his voice soothing like a gentle balm on a wound. "I understand that you were going through a difficult time. We all stumble and fall, but it's how we pick ourselves up that truly matters." Mr. Chen felt a wave of relief wash over him, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had been forgiven, not just by the pastor, but by himself. "Thank you, Pastor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your kindness means more to me than words can express." The pastor sat down on the bench, patting the space beside him for Mr. Chen to join. "Tell me, my son, what troubles your heart so?" And so Mr. Chen poured out his woes, his fears, his frustrations. He spoke of his struggling business, his mounting debts, his resentment towards those who seemed to have it easier. The pastor listened patiently, nodding occasionally, his eyes filled with understanding. When Mr. Chen had finished, the pastor spoke, his voice calm and reassuring. "I understand your pain, Mr. Chen," he said. "Life can be challenging, and it's easy to lose hope when things don't go our way, but it's important to remember that you are not alone." He reached out and took Mr. Chen's hand, his grip firm and supportive. "There is always light, even in the darkest of times. You just have to look for it." He spoke of the importance of gratitude, of finding joy in the small things, of appreciating the blessings that surrounded him. He encouraged Mr. Chen to focus on the positive, to see the good in others, and to let go of the anger and resentment that were poisoning his heart. "Forgive those who have wronged you," the pastor advised, "not for their sake, but for your own. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, a way to free your heart from the chains of bitterness." He spoke of the power of faith, of finding strength in something greater than oneself, of believing in a brighter future, even when the present seemed bleak. Mr. Chen listened intently, his heart absorbing the pastor's words like a sponge. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, a calmness he hadn't experienced in a long time. He realized that he had been blinded by his own negativity, his own self-pity. He had forgotten the simple joys of life, the beauty of human connection, the power of kindness and compassion. He looked at the pastor, his face radiating warmth and serenity, and he knew that he wanted to be like him. He wanted to be a beacon of light, a source of hope, a person who spread joy and positivity wherever he went. He thanked the pastor for his guidance and wisdom, his heart filled with gratitude and newfound hope. He left the park with a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to change his ways and embrace a more positive outlook on life. As he walked back to his restaurant, he noticed the vibrant colors of the sunset, the playful chirping of birds, the laughter of children playing in the streets. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, a smile that hadn't been seen in a long time. He knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but he was no longer afraid. He had found a new path, a path guided by kindness, compassion, and faith. He was ready to face the future with a renewed sense of hope and a heart filled with gratitude. The transformation in Mr. Chen was like a sunrise, gradually chasing away the darkness and illuminating every corner of his life. He walked back to his restaurant with a newfound lightness in his step, a melody of hope humming in his heart. He started with small changes, conscious efforts to replace his grumpy demeanor with kindness. He greeted his returning staff with a genuine smile, thanking them for their patience and understanding. He even apologized for his past behavior, his sincerity touching their hearts and rekindling their respect for him. When the restaurant opened, he welcomed each customer with warmth and enthusiasm, his voice no longer gruff but filled with genuine hospitality. He offered suggestions with a twinkle in his eye, and he thanked each patron with heartfelt gratitude. Word of Mr. Chen's transformation spread like wildfire through the community. Customers who had abandoned his restaurant, lured by the novelty of the new establishment across the street, started to return. They were drawn not just by the delicious food, but by the welcoming atmosphere, the friendly smiles, and the genuine care that permeated the air. Families gathered around tables, sharing stories and laughter, their chopsticks clicking a cheerful rhythm. Couples enjoyed romantic dinners, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting in their happy eyes. Even the occasional solo diner felt a sense of belonging, embraced by the warmth and hospitality of Mr. Chen and his staff. The restaurant, once filled with tension and negativity, now buzzed with positive energy. The staff, inspired by Mr. Chen's example, worked with renewed enthusiasm, their service attentive and efficient. The kitchen, once a battleground of frustration, now hummed with a harmonious rhythm, the chefs creating culinary masterpieces with passion and pride. Mr. Chen's noodle house became more than just a place to eat. It became a haven of warmth and connection, a place where people felt valued and appreciated. It was a testament to the transformative power of kindness, a living example of how one person's positive change could create a ripple effect, touching the lives of everyone around them. As his business thrived, Mr. Chen's gratitude grew. He no longer measured success solely by the number of customers or the amount of money in the cash register. He found joy in the smiles of his patrons, the camaraderie of his staff, and the satisfaction of creating a place where people felt happy and welcomed. He never forgot the pastor's kindness, the gentle guidance that had led him out of the darkness and into the light. He often visited the pastor, sharing stories of his transformed life and expressing his heartfelt gratitude. One day, as they sat together in the park, watching the leaves dance in the autumn breeze, the pastor smiled and said, "You have found your true path, Mr. Chen. You have discovered the power of kindness, and you are sharing it with the world." Mr. Chen nodded, his eyes filled with tears of joy. "Thank you, Pastor," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You have shown me the way, and I will never forget your kindness." He looked around at the park, at the families enjoying the sunshine, at the children chasing pigeons, at the elderly couples strolling hand in hand. He saw the beauty in the simple things, the joy in everyday moments, the love that connected all living beings. He had found success, not just in his business, but in his heart. He had found gratitude, not just for the blessings in his life, but for the challenges that had led him to this moment of transformation. He had found peace, not just within himself, but in his connection to others, in the shared humanity that bound them together. And he knew, with unwavering certainty, that this was just the beginning of a beautiful journey, a journey filled with kindness, compassion, and endless possibilities. Mr. Chen's noodle house became a beacon of warmth and hospitality in the bustling city. Its windows glowed with inviting light, and the aroma of delicious spices wafted through the air, drawing people in like moths to a flame. But it wasn't just the mouth-watering dumplings or the fragrant noodles that kept customers coming back for more. It was the atmosphere, the feeling of welcome and belonging that enveloped everyone who stepped through the door. Mr. Chen, once a grumpy and irritable man, now greeted his patrons with a genuine smile and a twinkle in his eye. He remembered their names, their favorite dishes, their stories. He treated each person like an old friend, making them feel valued and appreciated. The restaurant buzzed with happy chatter and laughter, the clinking of chopsticks creating a cheerful symphony. Families gathered around steaming bowls of noodles, sharing stories and creating memories. Couples enjoyed intimate dinners, their conversations punctuated by soft laughter and stolen glances. Even solo diners felt a sense of connection, embraced by the warmth and camaraderie of the space. Mr. Chen's kindness extended beyond his customers. He treated his staff with respect and appreciation, creating a harmonious work environment where everyone felt valued and supported. The kitchen, once a battleground of stress and frustration, now hummed with a joyful rhythm, the chefs working together with passion and camaraderie. Word of Mr. Chen's transformation spread throughout the community. He became known not just for his delicious food, but for his generous spirit and his kind heart. He donated meals to local shelters, volunteered at community events, and always had a helping hand for those in need. He had become a pillar of the community, a shining example of how one person's positive change could create a ripple effect, touching the lives of countless others. Mr. Chen's story is a testament to the power of forgiveness and second chances. He had fallen into a pit of negativity and resentment, but through the compassion of a stranger, he found his way back to the light. He learned that forgiveness is not just about letting go of anger, but about opening your heart to the possibility of change and redemption. It also highlights the importance of overcoming adversity through faith and compassion. Mr. Chen faced numerous challenges, both personal and professional, but he found strength in his newfound faith and in the kindness of others. He learned that even in the darkest of times there is always hope, and that compassion can be a powerful force for healing and transformation. His journey underscores the importance of humility and respect. He had been arrogant and dismissive, but he learned to value the dignity and worth of every human being. He realized that true success lies not in wealth or power, but in treating others with kindness and consideration. Finally, Mr. Chen's story reminds us of the profound impact our actions can have on others and ourselves. Every word we speak, every gesture we make, can create ripples that extend far beyond our immediate surroundings. By choosing kindness, compassion, and forgiveness, we can create a positive impact on the world, transforming not just our own lives, but the lives of those around us. Mr. Chen's Noodle House became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol of hope, a testament to the transformative power of human connection. It was a place where people came not just to satisfy their hunger, but to nourish their souls, to find comfort in the warmth of human kindness, and to be reminded of the beauty that exists in the world, even in the midst of darkness.